welcome. Today I will be reading a book by Joanna Lindsey. I know almost nothing about it. It was my husband's grandmother's book. So get ready to listen. I want to start reading more books on my channel, especially romance books. But not only those, I have a lot of others that I plan on reading. But this is what I want to start with. And I am horrible at doing the hand gestures. I love watching people do that for ASMR, but I can't do it. So, this is the book. And I have read a Joanna Lindsey before from my grandmother. But I've never seen this one or heard of it. So, it's Once a Princess. And the cover is really pretty. I feel like old romance books had the best covers. Now they're usually pretty discreet, or they have like a half-naked person on the front and like a man's chest or something. I don't really like those covers. I really enjoy these old ones. They just catch your eye, and they have so many colors. So when I start reading, I may speak a little bit louder. Tell me what you like. Do you like whispered reading or like soft talking? So the spine is cracked a few times, but it doesn't look bad. And then on the back, we have the little sticker, romance sticker, and it must have been $3. Not sure where she got it. Probably, I know sometimes at dollar stores they'll have like little $3 books like this. So I'll read you the back before I start reading some of the inside. And of course, I can't read the whole book, but I'll hopefully get through some chapters today. So it says, Once upon a princess. Once upon a time, in a rustic Mississippi tavern, a beautiful exiled princess was forced to dance for the pleasure of others, unaware of her regal birthright, and infuriated by a magnificent golden-eyed devil who crossed an ocean to possess her. From a far-off land, a bold and brazen prince came to America to claim his promised bride. But the spirited vixen spurned his affections while inflaming his royal blood with passion's fire, impelling virile Stephen Barani to take in sensuous and searing conquest. The love young Tatiana vowed never to yield. So Joanna Lindsey does write, I wouldn't say it's like spicy in comparison to Book Talk or anything, but I mean it is like romantic and sweeping type of romance, which I like. Sometimes it depends on how crazy it gets. So I used to not like romance. Lately I've liked it a little bit more. Chapter 1, Karenina, and I have not pre-read, so if I say some things wrong, I'm sorry. Karenina, 1835. The Crown Prince of Karenina drew to a halt upon entering the anteroom outside the royal bedchamber. Maximilian Danef awaited him there, alone. A portentous reminder of the prince's youth and the punishments he'd received, deservedly and sometimes not. Whenever he had been called to account for his misdeeds, it had been in these chambers, with no attendants to bear witness, other than Count Danif, who had always served as a buffer between two hot tempers. Danif was prime minister now, but even before he had risen to that exalted position, he had been a friend and advisor to the king. He spoke now in the soothing accents bequeathed him by a Romanian mother. "Your expendency is appreciated, your majesty. I fear we may have to scour the countryside in search of gypsies' camps to find you." The censure was there, unrestrained as usual. Max disapproved, even more than the king did, of the way the prince sometimes took his leisure. But the words didn't affect him in the usual way, neither heightening his color nor producing anger. It was the address, majesty, rather than highness, that arrested the prince's attention, draining colors from his features. "My God, he's dead! No, no!" Maximilian shouted, horrified that he had given that impression. But he paused, aware that the crown prince had had no forewarning of what he was about to impart. Sandor has abdicated formally with the Turkish Grand Vizier as witness. Color furiously returned to the prince's cheeks, and why was I not invited to this monumentous occasion? It was thought that you might be moved to protest, as well I should, why Max, his physicians claimed he has improved. Were they lying for my benefit? He has improved, but it will not last if he returns to his duties. And even so, you were told that the time he has left is limited. Your father has reached his 65th year. This condition that has affected his heart has taken his strength from him. A few more months is the most we can hope for. No expression crossed the prince's features to tell of the pain those words caused, other than the closing of his eyes. He had been told that Max had just reminded him of, but as any child might do when faced with losing his only remaining parent, he had ignored the warnings and clung to hope. And the physicians had given him that hope, a false hope, he now realized. "Is this why I was summoned?" he asked bitterly. "To be told I am to be crowned before the old king is even in the grave. I know you feel it is wrong, but it cannot be helped. It is what your father wants. You could assume the reins, as you do whenever he leaves the country. He need not have relinquished the honor before death took it from him." Maximilian smiled sadly. "Do you truly believe he would not involve himself in the rigors of office when he is here and kept well informed? The only way he will have the peace necessary to survive a little while longer is to remove his right to rule. He knew this, and this is what he has done. And it is only one of the reasons you were summoned, not the most important. What can be more so? Sander will tell you. He awaits you now, so go into him, but a word of caution, if you will. Do not remonstrate with him for what has already been done and cannot now be changed. He abdicated willingly and even with happiness because you are and have always been the pride of his life. As for the rest, restrain your temper and arguments and bring them to me when you leave him. I am prepared to deal with both, Your Majesty. The address was said deliberately this time and meant to tell him that even though he was now king, Max would treat him no differently than he ever had, with love and calm reasoning in the face of his royal rage. Speculation over what was going to cause that rage filled him with dread as he entered the royal bedchamber. Max knew that he rarely lost his temper anymore. Certainly he would argue with anyone, regardless of rank. But since he had become a man, he prided himself on having developed more control of his temper. The abdicated king of Cardinia lay propped up in his bed, a huge monstrosity that required steps to reach the dais it sat upon, then more to reach the top mattress, which was draped in fine velvets and silks, and was attached to a solid gold headboard, displaying the royal crest at its head. The rest of the room was just as opulent. Marble floors reflected the candlelight. Walls draped in the finest silk were adorned with artwork from the masters of Europe. Some paintings spread from floor to ceiling, all in solid gold frames. But the king's bedchamber was no different from the rest of the palace, where gold and silver abounded, and assured any visitor that Cardinia, although relatively small in comparison to her neighbors, contained within her borders innumerable gold mines that made her one of the richest countries in Eastern Europe. Already he scowls, Sander grumbled as his son drew near. My last minutes confessed you frightened her to death. My last mistress confessed you frightened her to death when you looked just so, with a countenance to send children screaming for their mothers. I am not surprised. Sander grew uncomfortable with a subject that, by unspoken agreement, was never to be broached. He quickly changed it with the promise, if Max has overstepped his bounds, I will have his tongue cut out. He told me only that I am king. Ah, Sander ignored the sharp tone and relaxed back into his pillows, patting the mattress beside him. Come, join me as you used to do. The prince didn't hesitate, but bound up the dais and stretched out his long frame on the foot of the mattress. He rested on one elbow, staring at his father with the patience he was becoming renowned for. Sanser knew in that moment that his abdication wouldn't be questioned, no matter how much his son might abhor his decision. He sighed in relief. That had been the only contention as he saw it. The rest was a matter of record that merely needed to be recalled. Yes, you are king, to be crowned within the week, before the Grand Vizier ends his visit. What? No gold-engraved invitations to the crowned heads of empire? Sander grinned despite his son's sarcasm. At present, we have guests representing 8 of those monarchs. 3 princesses, or princes, an archduchess, several counts, our esteemed friends from Turkey, and even an English earl who has tracked Abdul Mustafa across our borders. We will make use of them all to witness the occasion. No one will doubt that you are my heir, not only by right, but also by choice and favor, well loved by your people, only lacking a queen at your side. The prince stiffened. Deep inside, he had known what it was he dreaded hearing, and he had been right. You survived without a queen these past 15 years since my mother died. Those words told Sander how upset the prince really was. Instead of shouting and raving, he had made an absurd statement like that didn't warrant an answer, much less acknowledgement. Yet because his son was managing to restrain his rage, Sander did answer. I had my crown prince, so that need had I of another wife, other than for political reason, which never arose. You cannot say the same. Then let me choose. The words were whispered, as close to pleading as the prince would ever come. Sander had heard them before. The last time this subject had been brought up, when his son returned from his European tour, claiming he had found a woman he wished to make his own. Of course, that time had not been so quiet in his protest when he was denied. This time, Sander didn't think he could withstand such protest. To avoid them, he said, It is my last wish, my death wish, if you will, that you will honor the betrothal made the day Tatiana Janek, I don't know how to say her name, was born. Her father was our king, and it was his wish and decree that you rule as her consort. He could have chosen from any of the royal houses of Europe, but he chose my son. The honor was overwhelming. The honor would have been negated with the birth of another. I need to learn how to say it now. It's Janekek son. When the Stambolovs swore to wipe out his whole line, and within months they did so, everyone except for the girl child, whom I secreted out of the country. All that amazes me is that no one has ever whispered that I had more to gain than the Stambolovs with the Janek's deaths. I might just have to say Jana. I gained the throne. Their feud was legendary. You had no part in it. Be that as it may, the last Stambolov has finally been found and eliminated. At long last, it is safe for the princess to return to her homeland and sit on the throne that is her birthright. She lost that right, father. No one wanted an infant queen, especially one whose chances of surviving an assassin's bullet were next to nothing. Though she still lived, you were declared king. Even if she now returns, she no longer has claim to the crown. Except through you, Sander reminded him softly. Circumstances have made you king instead of consort. You no longer must rule through her, but hers is the true royal line, and your children can only benefit from it. Ours is royal, certainly, but indirectly descended. My God, 11 Janna had to die, Gen X, before I became next in line to the throne. 11. The crown should never have been mine, nor did I covet it, cursed as it was. But it came to me, and now to you. And you, my boy, are the end of the royal line. You and this one surviving Janek. So whatever maggoty reason you have in your head for not wanting her, you will ignore it and honor my last wish. You will go to the Americas, where Baroness Tomilova has raised her. You will bring her home and wed her with all the pomp and circumstance a royal wedding decrees. And God willing, I will live long enough to see it done. Without those last words, the prince might have continued his quiet arguments, might even have given his reasons for not wanting the Janek princess, though that was doubtful because his reasons were locked away in the darkest part of his soul. But with those words, the hopeful words of a dying man, so be it. Maximilian Denef was not treated to the same acquiescence, however, not by any means, but despite the fact that he was nearly half a head shorter than the crown prince, soon to be crowned king, and frail of body next to the younger man's military-honed frame, he was not the least bit intimidated by the blast of fury that met him outside Sander's chamber. Who even remembers that this royal, I don't know if I can say this word, but B-I-T-C-H, is alive? The prince snarled the moment he closed the door. Maximilian nudged him out of the anteroom and away from Sander's hearing before he answered. Everyone present at your betrothal, I don't doubt, which, by the way, is binding not only by our laws, but by your honor. You, P-A-S-T-A-R-D. I don't know if YouTube will let me say these words. I hope you had more strength than your father. Shut up, Max. Just shut up. The words were shouted without the least heed to the guards and attendants they passed, who had been temporarily banished from the royal chambers. If Maximilian weren't thick-skinned, he might take umbrage at being spoken to that way before those of lesser rank, who were now wide-eyed as they watched the prince stalk away. But being associated with autocrats almost demanded the suspension of one's pride, certainly of one's temper. I don't believe you've ever mentioned what it is you object to," Max called out as he tried to keep up with the prince's long strides. "Perhaps if you told me what difference now? He's made it a last request, not an order, but a death wish. Do you know what that means?" "Certainly. You might have ignored the order, but now you will put your heart and soul into fulfilling this wish." The prince swung around, eyes blazing. Did you know he meant to employ such vile manipulation? He was too volatile to remain still long enough to hear the reply. Maximilian had to hurry again, just to stay within shouting distance. "No," he said, but it was ingenious of Sander to think of it, since he hasn't the strength now to coerce you in the usual way. "Go away, Max, before I forget that you have been like a second father to me." Max stopped abruptly, not because of that supposedly dire warning, but because he was out of breath, and because the new king, in his rage, had missed the turn that led to the east wing of the palace, where his apartments were located. The corridor he had taken led to a dead end, but it was still several minutes before he discovered that for himself and returned, allowing Max enough time to consider what information he possessed that might make the younger man accept the inevitable with a little more princely grace than he had shown thus far. Before the prince reached him with his black glower, Max said, "Perhaps you worry that, being reared in a country so dissimilar from yours, the princess will have beliefs opposed to yours. But such could not have happened, not with a guardian like Baroness Tomilova, who was her mother's closest friend. The child will have been prepared for her destiny with great care, taught to love the country of her birth as well as her betrothed. A fortune was also supplied for her keep, so she will have been raised in splendor and spoiled right down to her toenails, no doubt." "Possibly," Max grinned, "but her appearance is likely to more than compensate for that. You may not remember her parents, since you were living outside of the palace at the time, but they were a magnificently handsome couple. The queen was a renowned Austrian beauty who could have had her choice of husbands from any of the royal houses across the land, but she chose your Janek king. Their daughter can be nothing less than exquisite in her beauty." This did not seem to relieve the prince as Maximilian had hoped. Instead, the prince appeared even more enraged, if that were possible, snarling as he passed Max. "I spit on her beauty, for I will come to hate it and her each time she turns from me in revulsion." Pain filled Maximilian's eyes, for he finally understood. He had not thought of that. So, there's actually a little more to this chapter, but I will take a small break, and I do apologize for any slip-ups or mess-ups. So, if someone's watching this who has read this book, let me know, or if you've heard of it. I'm just gonna brush my hair a little. I don't think I've ever done this in an ASMR video, and I don't know why, but I thought it would supplement it well. Is that the right word? So, I'm liking it so far. It's the very beginning, but anything with royals or princes or princesses I like. So I think I also have a hair on my nose that I've been messing with this whole time. At some point I will have to get nails, maybe, if I'm going to keep doing ASMR videos. I stopped for a while, then came back, then stopped again, and I'm never as consistent as I would like to be. But if I keep reading, I think I will stay a lot more consistent, so. Excuse that my brush has, I clean it, but it gets hair in it so easily. My hair comes out fast, so. I just washed it, but if I don't keep it brushed, it'll tangle so very easily. And I'm thinking about coloring it. Not a whole different shade, but like, I don't know, putting some kind of color, maybe balayage, I don't know. But yeah. So let's get back to the book. Alright. We're moving on to a different point of view. And it is, I suppose, the princesses, Alicia. Yeah, Alicia. So, Alicia slumped down in her bath with a start of surprise when the prince slammed into his apartment. So I suppose Alicia is not who I thought she was. Let's look back and find out. Okay, so I don't even know if it says her name. Oh, Tatiana. Okay, that's the other love interest. So I guess Alicia is just a woman that's in his apartment bathing. So it took only a glance to grasp the reason for such a loud entrance. She sighed inwardly and dismissed her 2 attendants, who were only too happy to get out of there. She couldn't blame them. The first time she had seen this man angry, she had been too terrified. It was those eyes, hotly glowing, that could make a God-fearing soul want to cross herself. Devil's eyes. She'd heard them called more than once. But it was the power of his rank that was the true cause for fear. For if he killed someone in a rage, whether by accident or not, nothing much would be done about it. And who didn't know that? Including him. The first time he had been furious with his friend Lazar Dmitriev. For some silly reason she couldn't remember now, but she hadn't known that at the time, and had thought herself had done something wrong to make him look at her like that. This had been over a year ago, not long after she had become his mistress. So that's who this woman is, his mistress. And she hadn't known him so well then as she did now. She had thought he was going to kill her with the way he had come after her as soon as he noticed her, dragging her to the bed in the next room, throwing her down on it. But all he had been interested in was expending his passion by the means their relationship allowed him. It had not been a pleasant experience, certainly, with her fear making her stiff and unresponsive, but she was too experienced for it to be traumatic either. In fact, the only reason she had cried when it was over was because she was so relieved that was all he meant to do to her. But he didn't know that. He thought he had actually hurt her. She let him think so, for his guilt could be measured in gold, and was, by the magnificent gifts he had showered on her to make amends. She no longer feared him, even when he looked like this, as if he would strangle the first person he got his hands on. In fact, she stood up from her bath in full sight of him, deliberately prodding the passion he was in the grips of to the one she was more familiar with, and it worked. He came toward her and without a word yanked her into his arms and carried her into the other room. Alicia laughed, but only to herself. She wasn't stupid. There was the magnificent sapphire necklace that she had been after for the last month that he would buy her, and now he would. If she could just manage to squeeze out a few tears, an easy task for one as accomplished as she. So far, I'm not liking the man, and that can very much determine whether I actually finish a book. Perhaps he becomes better. I don't know. If he does not, I will probably not finish this. A lot of these older books, product of its time and everything, but you never know. Her other Joanna Lindsey book, I liked the male in that lead. As far as I can remember, I need to look up again what that book was. I cannot remember. It was a blue cover. There was a poor girl and a rich guy, and I don't know, I just remember liking that guy better. So let's go on to the next chapter, see how it does, see if we like the female interest. So, chapter 2, Natchez, Mississippi. Tanya, you lazy SLUT, where's my breakfast? I don't know if I should speak like that for her. But I feel like, especially 1800s Mississippi, they might have had that accent, who knows. In the narrow hall, the girl with the heavy tray of food stopped short, cringing at the bellow. Wilbur Dobbs had the kind of voice that carried, and his did with regularity, right out his open window to their neighbors up and down the street. It was embarrassing, or used to be, to go out and hear the snickers and worse, the mimics. But then her neighbors weren't the kind who might feel sympathy or pity over the verbal abuse that came her way each day. And after so many years of the same, one became less embarrassed, almost immune. But it wasn't as bad as it used to be, not since Dobbs' illness had made him dependent on her. That thought made Tanya smile suddenly, which lit up her face and brought a rare sparkle to her pale green eyes. She still wasn't used to her change in circumstances. Verbal abuse was all Dobbs could give her, now that he was bedridden and could no longer beat her. She'd seen to that the very day he took to his bed, when she'd burned the stick that had been his constant companion for more years than she could remember. She cringed again, recalling that stick. Her circumstances might have improved beyond her wildest dreams, but some 20 years of misery was not easy to forget. So I'm assuming Tanya is Tatiana, just short since she's working as a maid. She took the tray into him now, dropping it on the table next to his bed, unmindful of the noise it made. What the H-E-L-L took you so long, Missy? The beer delivery arrived early. He grunted, which meant he accepted that excuse when the truth was she decided to eat her own breakfast first for a change before she brought up his. And what was the take last night? He wanted to know. I haven't tallied it yet. I'll want an accounting after I'm done cleaning up last night's mess. He flushed red at her answer. She flushed some herself at her audacity. She would never have spoken to him like that 6 months ago, and they both knew it. She would have rushed to do his bidding, forsaking any other chore, and she certainly wouldn't have interrupted him. I'm sorry, she offered out of habit, but I'm down 2 jobs now, both yours and mine, and there never seems to be enough time in the day to do it all. We really need to hire. Now, you're doing just fine on your own. We already have 3 others to pay. Any more will cut into the profits. She wanted to argue. She really did, but knew it wouldn't do her a bit of good. He made a good profit. He always had, but he never let her spend any of it. Not in the tavern that was their livelihood, nor on herself. What the devil did he think he was saving it for? He was 60 years old, if he was a day, and he was dying, a fact that elicited not the least bit of sadness from her or anyone else who knew him. For the first 10 years of her life, Tanya had thought this man and his wife were her parents. Finding out differently had brought her joy, not pain. But who her real parents were, she didn't know. Iris Dobbs. I have to move a little. Iris Dobbs had been able to tell her only that the woman who had given her to them when she was a baby had claimed to be her mother one minute, then no relation to her the next. But the fever had made the woman say all kinds of crazy things. Iris had died 8 years ago. She had been Tanya's only buffer, taking many of the beatings meant for her. In fact, it was one of those beatings that had killed Iris, though Dobbs had got away with calling it an accident simply because she was his wife. The things a husband was allowed to do didn't bear thinking of. And not for the first time, Tanya swore that a husband would never make a chattel out of her, because she'd never have one. If she'd learned anything living with Dobbs all her life, she'd learned how precious her few rights were, and she wasn't about to give them up for anything. She just wished she'd known she had some sooner. Wished she'd known that she could leave if she wanted without being hunted down. It had taken one of the barmaids to point this out when she had witnessed Dobbs taking the stick to her by asking why Tanya stayed. In fact, Tanya had threatened to leave then. She'd been all of 18, or thereabouts, and could easily get a job in another tavern, since she knew everything there was to know about running such a place. That was when Dobbs had first tempered her with ownership of the Circlio. But the promise of his leaving the tavern to her was all she'd had until his illness. Then she'd insisted on having it written down on paper, that precious paper, hidden under a floorboard in her room. The Seraglio was all but hers now, to do with as she would. It might exhaust her and cause one headache after another, but it represented independence, peace, and total control, or soon would. Things she'd never had before, and which she craved now with a passion. To have them, she only had to take care of Dobbs for his remaining days. No more than she'd done all her life anyway. Tanya left him as soon as she could, for she hadn't exaggerated. There was never enough time in each day to do all that was required of her. The 3 helpers were no help where cleanup was concerned. Dobbs had never wanted to pay them extra when he had Tanya at no cost, and so they left at the close of the business, even if the common room looked like a storm had come through it. It usually was a filthy mess, with mugs left on tables, ale spilled, chairs toppled, some broken, cigar butts mixed with spittle on the hardwood floor. Tanya usually attended to it before she retired for the night, but last night there had been a fight over the current barmaid, Aggie, between one of the local planter's sons and a sailor from the Lorelei, just docked that morning. Dobbs used to handle all the fights with a cuticle in one hand and a pistol in the other. Now Tanya had to depend on Jeremiah, who tended the bar, and while Jeremiah might have the necessary bulk to intimidate the true drunken customers, he did not have the gumption. It wasn't the first time Tanya had had to step in between the 2 brawlers since she'd taken over the running of the Seraglio. Getting a couple of bruises before the fighters realized she was interfering was pretty common too, but last night had been an exception, since she had been tired and out of sorts, and in no mood to reason first. Normally, she drew no notice, for she'd learned at an early age how to mask delicacy and fine features with severity, drabness, and a gauntness that could be achieved by using theatrical makeup, if not by actual exhaustion. She was a fixture of the place, sometimes serving customers when Aggie was harried because April was performing, sometimes working behind the bar when Jeremiah didn't show up for work. She was always there, ready to attend to whatever was necessary, even breaking up fights. She, not even 5.5 feet tall, with her hair severely pulled back and bundled at her nape, wearing a serviceable black skirt, unadorned and unbustled, and one of Dobbs' old gray shirts that reached her knees. The shirts were belted to accommodate the wicked-looking knife she'd been wearing at her hip ever since Dobbs had taken ill, a longer bladed weapon than the knife she'd carried in her right boot for as long as she could remember. She'd brought both into play last night, slashing in a wide circle that effectively separated the two antagonists. She hadn't had to say a single word after that. The planter's son, who was regular and well aware that she didn't palm her weapons unless she was prepared to use them, apologized for the disturbance and resumed his seat. The sailor, there for the first time, was too surprised to offer any more trouble, and Jeremiah, late into the fray but handy just the same, escorted him to the door. But despite the ease with which she'd ended the fracas, Tanya's nerves had still been on edge for the remainder of the night, and such extreme tension was debilitating. That was why she'd gone straight to bed as soon as she'd locked up. She could accept violence against herself more easily than she could accept having to dole it out, because receiving it had been a matter of course her whole life. Inflicting some of her own went against her grain, yet she didn't hesitate to do so when it was necessary, and it had been necessary a number of times over the years, and more often in just the past 6 months. In spite of everything she did to appear unappealing to the Seraglio's customers, a drunk sometimes didn't see too well, and all it took was the sight of a skirt to make one think he'd found an available female. She'd had her share of pinnacles and pawing. I guess pinches, not pinnacles. For the most part, ended with a sharp sword, ward, or a well-placed cuff to the side of the head. If a man was drunk enough to have blurred vision, he was drunk enough for her to handle. It was those times when she was caught alone outside the common room by men not so drunk, in either the storeroom or the kitchen, or on her way to the stables out back, or even followed into her room once, that she'd had to get serious about protecting herself. But those attempts were made by men who'd known her for a long time, weren't fooled by her normal appearance, and now thought to take advantage of Dobbs' incapacity. The only good thing she could say about Dobbs was that when he'd been hale and hearty, he'd been a potent discouragement to anyone who wanted to lay his hands on her. Once he'd nearly beaten to death one of his own friends who had tried to kiss her, and that kind of news spread fast. Not that he had been protecting her virtue then or in any other instance. He simply hated fornication with a passion and wouldn't stand for it under his roof. If Aggie and April wanted to accommodate customers in that way, and both of them often did, they made private arrangements. More recently, they sneaked off to the stables whenever things slowed down. Dobbs' reaction wasn't normal, certainly, but it was amusing, since Iris had once confessed that it was because he couldn't do it anymore himself. Typical of Dobbs, then, not to want anyone else to do what he couldn't. Tanya spared only one sigh as she looked over the common room before she got busy. There was also the beer shipment to be seen to, lunch and dinner to prepare, new candles to order, which required a 3-block walk past gambling dens, brothels, and seedier taverns that were open day and night. Since the Seraglio was located in one of the worst sections of Natchez, and then, just before it was time to open the doors, April's little brother stopped by to tell Tanya that the Seraglio's main attraction had sprained her ankle and wouldn't be able to perform tonight or anytime soon. Just what she needed to hear. Minutes before opening, a headache began immediately. So that's all I will read today. It's a little saucier than I expected, but it is definitely sounding like one of these old Avon books. I'm sure you've heard of it if you've read any romance or seen maybe someone in your family, especially an older woman, reading a romance novel from Avon. They are usually about this size when you see them, and paperback. It's not always the case. The last Joanna Lindsey book I read was actually hardback. But yeah, so I don't know if that sounds good at all. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you want maybe a few more chapters. That might be all right with YouTube and copyright and everything. And I have some other books I will also read. Some will be like this, more romantic, and others won't be. So I have one on mermaids I want to do a little bit of reading with. I think that'll be super fun and interesting. It's just about the lore of mermaids pretty much. So thank you for watching and have a good day.